Well, joining us online to discuss everything economics related is Representative Jody Arrington, of course, from Texas. He is the House Budget Committee Chairman. Representative, thanks so much for joining the show. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Ben. Great to be with you.
Well, I do want to get to the budget, the big, beautiful bill and all that. Obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't start with the big economic news, perhaps of the decade, which would be the president's announcement of his tariffs yesterday. The markets reacted quite poorly this morning. Obviously, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dumped 3% on open. Similar numbers from the S&P 500, the NASDAQ down almost 5%. What do you make of the tariffs? Do you think that they are geared toward the lowering of tariffs in other countries? What are you hoping President Trump is going to achieve with this?
I hope past his prologue and that the same strategies that were applied in President Trump's first term that were successful in resetting the trade arrangement or relationship with our trading partners happens in this round, and I suspect it will. So we just need a level playing field for manufacturers, for farmers, and for our workers. And I think that's a pretty basic principle that we should rally around the president for. We've had our manufacturing and industrial base hollowed out over the years. We've suppressed worker wages in this country. We've left economic activity and growth on the table, all because we've allowed other countries to take advantage of our low barriers to entry or access to our markets, while they have used tariffs and a lot of non-tariff barriers to effectively tax our products going in to their market. So this reset's important. There will be pain and some disruption on the front end, but in the long run, we have to do it. And the big piece of this that is probably underestimated and undervalued is our dependence on other countries for drugs, for computer chips, and other important products and materials for our national security or public safety. So all in all, this will be a huge boon to this economy and critical to our national security. Trump has to stay the course. We have to support him. And I'm all in. Now,
Congressman, I do have to ask a couple more questions on that. One is,
sure.
You mentioned semiconductors, you mentioned some of the other products that are national security related. He's already exempted, he says, semiconductors from the import tariffs, presumably because it would raise prices too much on so many of the products that we use. And I guess the other question is that the sheet that he put out yesterday, that the administration put out, labeling tariff rates at 70, 80, 90% in some of these countries, it appears that was calculated by essentially just taking the trade deficits with those countries and dividing it into the imports to the United States from those countries and coming up with a percentage that really has nothing to do with the tariff rate. So, for example, South Korea is listed on this particular form as having a 50% tariff rate. We have a free trade agreement with South Korea. We pay an effective tariff rate in South Korea of something like 0.8%. Even if you add their value-added tax on top, you're talking about like a 10% tariff, certainly not a 50% tariff. My problem with that calculation is,
sure,
I'm with you. I want them to lower their trade barriers, but it seems to me that if you're a country like, for example, Israel literally yesterday announced 0 tariffs on American products coming in. We hit them with a 17% tariff anyway. What sort of deliverable is the administration actually looking for? That's the thing I want clarity on. If there's a deliverable on the other end of these tariffs, sure, sounds great. What do you think the deliverable ought to be?
Well, I think it should just be an apples to apples fairness in terms of trade policy. So it should be tariffs. It should be, there are non-tariff sort of technical barriers like GMO with respect to our ag products. There are quotas that they're not considered tariff, but they're still huge barriers. They've been for many years for dairy products going into Canada. That was part of the restructuring of the NAFTA to USMCA. And so there's a number of ways, VAT taxes, border adjustment taxes. So I think the president and his team are looking at the totality of it. But I'm with you. It needs to be apples to apples. We're not looking for isolationism, or we're not looking for Chinese industrial policy where we're subsidizing our guys and blocking out competition from others. We believe in free markets and competition, but free markets and free trade don't exist if they're not fair on an apples to apples trade policy basis. And I think that's a good fundamental principle in trade policy and trade negotiations.
And Congressman Arrington, well, one of the things that I think that people in the markets are worried about is that there's been a lot of whipsawing, a lot of kind of policy uncertainty so far, particularly with regard to this stuff. The investors that I know are kind of holding out their money, waiting to see where everything settles, which isn't an unreasonable position given the changes. President Trump is declaring these tariffs on a national emergency basis. And the national emergency that he's claiming is the trade deficit. It is difficult to see how a trade deficit amounts to a national emergency under the law. Where do you think the line of congressional authority lays with regard to tariffs as opposed to executive authority on tariffs?
That's a great question. I think there are national security implications if we can't make materials that go into making war machines that protect our country and our allies like Israel. So that's one you have to watch closely. I think we all were surprised during COVID to find out that we couldn't get protective gear for our healthcare workers, or that 90% of our antibiotics, for example, were made in China. And then, computer chips that run everything effectively, we were a sole source provider with Taiwan. So you have to look at these things, I agree with, in terms of where is the national security or public safety nexus. And then on everything else, Ben, it needs to be the apples to apples fairness issue. And because I do think we've been taken for granted. That's why we have a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 a deficit with the top 20 countries representing the top 20 largest economies in the world.
So, Congressman Arrington, all of this makes it that much more important that the big, beautiful budget resolution actually get passed, because the market's already priced in, I assume, because pretty much everyone I'm talking to has, the permanence of the Trump tax cuts. If that were to disappear, there would be a massive market catastrophe. I think it's pretty clear to everybody that the big, beautiful bill needs to happen. Where does that stand? How do you see that being ushered through the process?
Well, let's just go back and look at, just real quickly, the first term. We had the highest levels of business investment, R&D investment. We had the lowest unemployment. We lifted 6 million people out of poverty. All of this was the comprehensive economic policy agenda, which included reset on trade, but it also was good energy policy, good tax policy, and work incentives, right? Work incentives for work-capable adults. So we've got to get back, transition from unbridled spending and failed economic policies to this agenda, most of which, to your point, is wrapped up in this budget reconciliation bill. We need to lock in the low taxes. We certainly can't have $400 billion tax hikes in the first year, which send us into a recession. We can't add 22% on average of a tax hike on tax-paying Americans after Bidenflation, which was about a 20% regressive tax hike. So couldn't agree more. That's in there. Opening up energy production, deregulating the economy, work incentives, investment in military and border security, all in there. That's why it's one big, beautiful bill, right? That is the full America First agenda for the most part, and the most consequential piece of legislation in my lifetime, Ben. But we have to make sure that as we advance this and all the cost to it, we start to bend the spending curve that's driving an unsustainable debt. And Republicans have failed in the past to do that. And I want to make certain, not just for this great country, our economy, and our current security or defense readiness, but for our children who are going to inherit the whirlwind of our recklessness, now to the tune of $36 trillion in debt, $2 trillion annual deficits, $1 trillion just to service the debt. Those are all deferred taxes on our children. So we have to have offsets. We cannot increase the deficit, and we got to get our country on a sustainable and responsible path. That's missing from the Senate's bill. That was in the House bill, and I made sure of it along with other colleagues. So at the end of this rainbow, we have to get to a spot that we reignite economic growth through all the policies we talked about, including tax, but we're bringing the debt to GDP down. We're bringing the deficit to GDP down. Otherwise, we bankrupt the country, and none of this matters, none of it. And we're not the leader of the free world, and our values aren't the dominant values that influence the world, and we can't support our allies, et cetera, et cetera.
Congressman Arrington, I've said on the show that you co-authored with Phil Gramm, former chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, the single most important op-ed of the last 5 years, which was this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal talking about how means-tested welfare programs are the thing that's bankrupting the United States, that for the most part, Medicare and Social Security are paid for the most part, not in their entirety, but the thing that actually is rising dramatically continues to be the cost on the means-tested welfare programs. When you talk about the budget bill, what in your version of the budget bill was aimed at sort of bringing down the cost curve on those?
Well, a whole lot. I mean, you have to have, if you just took the Medicaid, that's the largest means-tested welfare program. It doesn't have a work requirement for able-bodied adults, like all the other programs from the Bill Clinton welfare to work era that actually brought down dependence on welfare by 80%. But it's been gamed by states and others, especially California. So we have to close the loopholes there, and we have to put actual expectations for work-capable adults in these programs, like in Medicaid. If you just reviewed the roles, this is a basic program integrity measure that everybody can understand. If you review the roles and make sure that those benefiting are legally eligible and they're not here illegally in this country or for other reasons aren't eligible, then you save $160 billion just reviewing it twice versus once. So it's all of the above. You also have states and local special interests that siphon money away from these programs that have nothing to do with the beneficiary. So it's broken. It's part of what's bankrupting the country. And we've got to act responsibly as we right this fiscal ship to focus on these welfare programs.
Well, that's House Budget Chairman Jody Arrington doing good work on the Hill. Really appreciate your time, sir, and thanks for your insight.
Ben, it's an honor to be with you.